that'll be great.
Mm-hmm. All right, we are good to go.
So welcome to our Summit Work Group meeting. So glad to be here. The news of my death was greatly exaggerated last meeting, so I'm glad to be here tonight. We'll hit the next slide. And
as normal, if you could just make sure you're muted when you are not talking. You can use the chat to ask questions or raise your hand as well. The meeting is being recorded, and could work group members please just type their name in the chat.
I didn't find that on Apple Music.
Sorry about that. So that's the welcome. I'm going to jump into tonight's meeting. Meeting minutes. If you read them, I was absent, so I'll be voting in abstention today, but I do agree with everything that was mentioned. Can I get approval of the minutes?
The October 25th, and can we do the September 16th all in one?
Yes, October and September minutes.
Are you voting for them together? Because my vote's actually different for each.
Oh, let's vote for them separately.
All right, we can start with this September, was it 12th meeting then?
I motion to approve the.
16th, sorry, yep.
I motion to approve September 16th.
Perfect. Is there a second?
Second.
Sarah?
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. I was there for that one.
Aye.
Aye.
Perfect. Any opposed? Perfect. The ayes have it. For the October meeting, can I open with discussion? Did I need to actually get a vote before I do that? Robert's Rules of Order, I always forget. Let's just jump in. Tika, any discussion?
I do not need to discuss, but I am abstaining.
Oh, okay. Then yes.
I was also absent.
Great. Are there any discussion about those minutes either? Perfect. Then we have two absentia. Can I get somebody to approve the minutes? First to approve the minutes. Who was preferably there?
I'll motion to approve the minutes.
Perfect. Second for that one.
I will second. This is Chuck.
Perfect. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any in absentia? Aye.
Aye.
And Tika. All right.
Got it.
So the ayes still have it, and we can move on. Thank you for doing that. Meeting goals, Chuck.
All right. Today we have an update from Shannon Griffin. We're going to talk about the independent funding assessment RFP. We have put together a draft of recommendations to take a look at based on our last couple meetings. And then we will have public comment. And Aaron, did we have anything in there about, did I see emails that we were going to have something about the, what's it called? The rubric or anything on there, or is that not today?
We are discussing the report card at the very end.
Report card, yes. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so it's my turn now, I guess. My screen is just doing something really weird, so I'm trying to get my view back, so I apologize.
It is you, Shannon.
All right, so our subcommittee met once again, and the subcommittee decided to pursue, there was consensus among those that were in attendance to pursue a resolution for the ombudsperson office / program and a bill. So that differs from my last conversation. And the reasoning for that is the resolution they think is a pretty swift way to reestablish the Delaware State Parent Advisory Committee. They can do that through resolution, and also the subgroup the equity working group that would really act as oversight and management for the office. The equity group, it outlines a more comprehensive list of who will actually participate in that subgroup. And I apologize for my delay. I did just send the latest draft of the resolution and analysis of similar offices across the country for those that may be interested in looking at that. So we're looking to, again, as I restate, draft a bill and a resolution to establish the office. The bill really helps to make sure that there's going to be regulatory language that will have to be put into play to establish the office through the code, and then be able to put a fiscal note that would impact the bottom line of the budget for the office. So that's the reason for the bill. The latest iteration has been updated to include more language that we pulled from the framework, from the initial framework that was approved, that really speaks to the scope of work. And if you have an opportunity, if you care to look at the analysis that was done around similar ombudsperson offices across the country, this is not anything that's revolutionary. And we really felt like the office, as the RFP was written, was really designed to be complaint driven, right? So it's individual families, has an individual issue, and that office deals with an individual family. And we really felt the need to address equity issues from a more systemic lens, and felt like the office could play a role in supporting the DOE as an independent agency and LEAs as well in that work, providing monitoring and also additional supports, specifically looking at, again, as issues of equity. So that's kind of where we are with that. Like I said, I did just submit both of those documents for the committee to take a look at for consideration. Any questions? Oh, Aaron, you want to add too?
Yeah, so the purpose of this is an update, and then we're going to send the documents off to everybody in this group. Wanted you to get a chance to look at them and then have our discussion in our next meeting, which is going to be jam-packed. So any questions for Shannon, you'll be getting the documents and get a chance to actually look at them, and we'll have conversation. I can say I've been to the meetings. I'm impressed with the work the group is doing and look forward to following up and adding recommendations at our next meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you for your work, Shannon.
Most welcome.
And Haley just forwarded everything along.
This one's me. Independent funding assessment timeline. So wanted to give an update. We're going to give feedback on a draft RFP. I know there was conversation at our last meeting and former meetings, previous meetings, discussing what the RFP should look like. So that one has actually come out. We'll get into that in a minute. November 28th, the work group chairs are going to send a draft RFP to writing consortium members for review. So after we discuss and come to agreement here. December 9th is going to be a full body consortium meeting, and my dog loves to talk as soon as I get on the mic. Vote to approve, reject sitting comments to Department of Education. If approved, then Senator Lockman and Matt Den will send to RFP for send the RFP to Department of Education. December 10th is the feedback due for Department of Education, and just so you're aware, the goal is that if we come to consensus tonight, but if there's anybody that wants to submit anything individually, you definitely can. So we'll be submitting what there's consensus about, but the timeline for public comment is open to everybody. So we're writing consortium consensus, and then anybody is open and welcome to do that as well. The next one, we'll get to the settlement statement. So you can read this. Key on the highlighted part, which is what we've been talking about. And then we'll get to the next slide. And this was also sent to you in email format. So if you'd like, you can click on that. The scope of work is what was submitted.
Is that showing right now or is it still the
Yes.
PowerPoint?
It is showing it is not the RFP.
What do you mean?
This is the draft, the scope of work. That's what was submitted. And the feedback for this is due December 10th. So Chuck, you want to discuss from the last meeting what the group came to consensus on?
Sure. So I'm not sure if we came to consensus, but what we did is we discussed some of these things, and then we, the co-chairs and the support staff, we did try to distill our discussion that we thought we were in pretty much agreement of down to some bullet points. So there's 5 bullet points on this slide, and there's a scoring, a potential recommended scoring matrix on the next slide. And these are the things that we think could be our recommendation to push up to the consortium main body. So maybe we could take a quick look at these things, see if we are in agreement that these things should be integrated into the RFP. We did expect, when we saw the scope of work come from the state, we expected a lot more, especially for $1 million. It's a very minimal statement that we got. If you do click on that document and see, most of it is just straight out of the settlement itself. So I think the approach that the state is taking is, well, let's see what all the people out there who have an opinion have to say, and then we'll change the scope of work based on that. I honestly, truly expected to see a lot more. So, we probably are going to have some kind of an impact. If we don't, then I'd be disappointed, because obviously not a whole lot of work has been done on the scope of work yet, as evidenced by the document that there's a link to in the chat right now. If there is work going on, it's going on behind the scenes, and it's not the open process that we are being told that it is. So I'm going to suspend that disbelief for a moment and believe that it is an open process and that we have the chance to give input. And that's what we're doing today. So please, let's take a look at these bullet points. So the first one we mentioned should be, this should be an adequacy study. It should be a part of this funding assessment. So we distilled that down to the assessment should explicitly include an adequacy study as a major effort of the assessment and as a deliverable. So do we need to hammer on that? Do we all agree on that? Is there anything we need to enhance in that? I can't see hands or anything, but I'm assuming that DOE can, or not DOE, the support staff can.
It sounds good to me.
All right. Anyone else? All right. Assuming that that is a common interest of ours as a committee, as a work group. The next one, the assessment should include assessment of the equalization function of Delaware's school funding system. I don't think many people would think that. I don't think people disagree that it's broken. Any comments on that? Any feelings on that? All right, third one. The RFP should ask bidders to describe in their response how they will determine action steps Delaware can feasibly take to improve equity in the state. Any response to that? Any adds, nips, tucks, deletes?
Do we want to, or is it just an assumption of progress monitoring for that and any metrics?
what would that look like? So what would that look like in RFP language that we could add to this? I mean, I think, let's see, it's an assessment, so it's not, I don't know if monitoring necessarily is part of the scope, but if you've got something you want to suggest, then let's, yeah, I see that we're ready to edit. So what action steps Delaware can feasibly take to improve equity in this state? So,
I guess my comment on it came from the language of determine action steps. So that's what I was saying. Are we just assuming that that's kind of incorporated in some of the action steps or not necessary?
oh, okay, so you're saying action steps Delaware can take to improve equity in the state and how those steps could be monitored for,
So if they're determining what action steps, like
Mhm.
how they're going to start, are they
Yes.
also going to say, how do you know you're continuing to do well or not? Or should we not even engage in that part yet?
No, I think that that's a good one. So let me take a run at this. So action steps Delaware can feasibly take to improve equity in the state, and how progress on those steps will be sustained and monitored. Let me put that down there, see what happens.
Go for it, Chuck.
All right.
Chuck,
Any
can I
comments?
just ask a question? And I'm sorry I'm coming in late, but did we have this? Because this is all new language to me.
This is, yeah, was it sent out? Haley? Yeah,
I'm looking through my old emails and I can't find it. So it's just my fault. So
This is time for conversation about it too. The deadline for us is tonight. Because the meeting for Reading Consortium is on December 9th. And so that's when we want to have this out by. The deadline is December 10th for Department of Ed.
all
And
right.
I'm not, I think asking the folks who are studying this to determine action steps or assuming that they will is not what I would envision somebody doing the study doing. What I've envisioned is that they will give us certain information that will allow folks in Delaware to decide how, based on whatever definition of equity and however they want to view these processes, what action steps should be taken. It's not as though these studies are absolutely straightforward. Here are the 5 things that you need to do to improve equity. They give us some information about how their definition of equity would play out, or various definitions, how the unit cost system would support or not support more equitable distribution of funds, how a weighted student or weighted pupil system. But it's not for them to determine action steps.
What I hear you saying is, but isn't that provide recommendations then, which is,
Yeah.
because to your point, Gary, you're right. They would not be able to create action steps, but they would be able to recommend action steps. Is that what your push is?
No, it's really not at all. And I'm sorry I'm coming to this late. But my point is that what we want to know are the various best practices, if you will. How would a best practice that's being implemented in other states relative to weighted pupil funding improve or fail to improve equity? Where would it get better? And is it it sufficient that we would want to that the legislature and others would want to take that up. The governor would want to recommend, but I wouldn't expect that there will be a recommendation. If you look at the adequacy study, the last one that was conducted, it doesn't have a recommendation or an action step. It just says, here's what you get if you do this, here's what you get if you do this, here's how they compare. And that's the information you need to make a decision.
How would you put the language there then? I wrote down what you just said, but I'm just curious what verbiage you would write for that bullet.
I just don't find these bullets to be pushing toward the right the right spot. I spent a good chunk of the day today to get out to this group after this meeting a list of the questions that I think need to be answered and specificity around those questions. But I understand that we have to get this done tonight, but it's just hard to, these bullets are so broad. The first one is fine, but I don't think adequacy studies are, I don't agree that we should do an adequacy study. I think we should look at what the unit cost method and a weighted per pupil funding method, how close would they get us to adequacy, not the kind of standard adequacy study that was done in the state is make this assumption, you're here, make this assumption, you're here, make another assumption, you're there. And that's what's generally done under these things that the term of art is an adequacy study. So this doesn't say what we mean by adequacy.
So go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, a couple meetings ago, we did have a somewhat deep discussion on an adequacy study. And I remember asking, there is a formal thing called an adequacy study? And folks on here said yes. And I thought that we were in agreement that that is one of the things that we wanted. On that third bullet though, where did it go? I had on my screen the
RFP should ask bidders.
Yeah, now it says the effort, even just the regurgitation of the settlement language says this effort must result in a final report that outlines the existing funding structure and, I'm going to emphasize this next part, provides recommendations for future improvements. So, when we talk about determining action steps, well, maybe we can, if we want to say provide recommendation for future improvements on equity or something, maybe that's the way we can make it match what's in the settlement. But I think that's our intent, at least. Yeah, I think that was our intent, that for $1 million, we should not just be getting what we're doing great, what we're not doing great, but we should be getting some action items out of it or some path forward out of it. For $1 million, I expect a lot.
Well, I do too. I just put a question. I've done about 8 or 10 research questions that I thought needed to be answered, just as the exercise to try to get myself in that position. So the equity funding, the adequacy that you have in mind, I think should be driven by a particular definition of adequacy, which is what is necessary to achieve equitable outcomes for all Delaware students, and then what evidence supports this amount of funding. So I
love that. Can you send them all to Haley or Kelly, and maybe we can get them put up on the screen here,
or put it in the chat.
Well, yeah, put it. You put the one in the chat.
The question.
Get them put in here because I think that's great.
So I'm happy to send them. Haley, is it easier for me just to email you with these?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, because here's this second question while I'm emailing her.
And Shannon said that, which I think probably indicates Shannon's
She said she finished. That's a
endorsement
great
of question number 1, right? Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my fingers were moved a little too fast for me. I apologize.
It is a great question. Yeah.
What's actually interesting is that what we're saying here is not negating anything. I think you're asking for more, just refining it from what I see, Garrett, in the questions.
Yeah, I'm really, I just think it's trying to add some specificity so we end up getting what we really want to get. So
I like number 2 too. So maybe we put a bullet here that says
Research questions.
the scope of the RFP should include, we recommend that it include answers to these 8 questions. We need to see the other 6, or including but not limited to these questions. Yeah, because number 2, which is, it's 2A, B, C, D. It's like a 4-part question. So we might have like 36 questions by the time we're done here, but yeah.
I just got Gary's email. Want me to put those questions up on the screen for us all to look at?
Sure, these are the ones from the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ones that he's putting in the chat.
Go for it.
I sent her the entire document, so she's got it.
Yep.
Perfect.
So the one thing about weighted student funding is that's just one way of doing it. And I know a lot of people who don't like the unit count system talk about weighted student funding. Are we funneling the study toward weighted student funding if we explicitly ask that, or are there other models and methods that we should try to give an equitable chance of becoming the ones that is that they find to be something we should consider?
Chuck, if you don't mind that I jump in, I just want to echo that just because it was sort of what I was thinking. Like, if there are improvements that could be made to our system that don't necessarily lead to weighted student funding, it'd be really, I think, appropriate to explore them and note and then explore them if necessary. But I just thought that you were thinking kind of what I was thinking as well.
Number 2,
The
though.
reason, Chuck, that it's here is it's parallel to number 2. So if you look at number 2, it's what are the advantages and disadvantages of Delaware's current unit cost method. And then 3 is what are the advantages and disadvantages of a weighted student funding method. That's the dominant method that's been used across the country. There's some other choices, but they can add to this. But at a minimum, we would want to contrast the outcomes related to these 2, and to be able to contrast the advantages and disadvantages to see if Delaware would want to move. So another question could be added: are there methods in addition to weighted student funding and unit costs that should be analyzed in the course of the study? What are they? And subject that to the same kind of analysis.
Yeah, let's wedge that in there. So Haley, if you put like a 3.1 as a placeholder, are there other funding models that should be considered? And that's, I put 3.1 just to get it in between 3 and 4. It's not a subset of 3. Okay, you got that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can fix the, when we submit the document formally, we can make it the formatting all correct.
So are there other funding models that should be considered, and then ask the same questions that we have below 2 and 3? Love it so far. Number 4.
Could I just jump in? It doesn't necessarily, in my mind, I don't think it necessarily has to be a model. There could be improvements onto our system and changes, but we don't necessarily, as a state, I would argue, need to adopt a whole new funding system if, we could make changes to it. So that's what, because it is the predominant system out there that is used by other states. And may I say, it doesn't work everywhere either. It doesn't necessarily give everything that's promised. There's still budget battles to be had in all of those states. But I would just say, some language that doesn't necessarily have to wedge the state or the legislature into one particular model. There may be improvements made onto ours that would be specifically for Delaware, and good for Delaware. So I just wanted to put that in there.
So how do we?
I think that's kind of captured though, isn't it? With the first question, when you're comparing to analyze if it's working or not. I mean, does that not get at that, like the advantages or disadvantages of it? Does that not do it?
Well, I think that one does it, and then 3.1 that Haley also added in, improvements to current system, capture both of those pieces.
Right,
And I
there you
agree
go,
with Kristen
yeah.
That this also is one, DOE gets to decide what they want to take from this, and then two, the group that is granted this independent study will then also decide what they want to put in it as well.
Yeah, I haven't read all of the questions, obviously, but I don't read any of this as needing to take a whole model, but rather looking at the pieces of each model and what are the advantages and disadvantages of the pieces, I guess, is how I'm reading it. Now, Gary, you're the author of these questions, so am I reading it correctly?
Yeah, that's what I had in mind. And it may be that in that indented section, we could add, are there improvements to the current system that would improve the equity of the distribution of funds or allocation of funds? I just like personally and think it's important to tie these things to equity, because there's a lot of other considerations, but I believe the most important for us has to do with equity.
I'm going back and Googling while I'm asking this question, so my brain and my fingers might go different speeds. Is there a definition of equity in the lawsuit? I know that might be a stupid question, but I feel like if we're tying everything back to equity and we don't say what we mean by it, I wonder if we end up with something we didn't mean to get.
Well, since this is looking for a response from bidders in an RFP, should we ask them what their definition is?
I think Gary had mentioned that too. For the actual lawsuit, I don't believe there's a definition provided by either the plaintiff. I don't think anybody put the definition out there. Shannon, is that correct?
I'm not finding it in my Googling, but that, could be.
So traditionally, I would say there are three ways that equity are normally, as a term of art in this kind of work, would be defined. One of them is around identifiable student groups that we know some of those groups cost more to educate than just average kid in a school, and that's tied to the economically disadvantaged special education and English learners. And then there's also identifiable racial groups in the gap there, and those are traditionally analyzed similarly. But I think those are the two typical definitions of equity, and so I put the one in here that are the identifiable groups that are traditionally used to judge the equity of the finance system. But I think we may want to include or mention that we want to see an analysis based on the historically underserved groups within the school.
It does refer to disadvantaged students. I just want to make sure that as we are, tying things to equity and we use that term, and I think we probably all generally agree what we mean when we say that, but, assumptions are made and then we end up with something we didn't mean to end up with, so.
Sarah, are you asking that part of this be they provide a definition, which is what I heard.
Yeah, I think that was your recommendation. I think that makes a lot of sense. Just make sure that we're all starting at the same baseline, right?
Mm-hmm. And I was doing that from Gary, by the way, so I got to give credit where credit's due.
We mean that the bidder would include their definition of equity?
Correct.
No,
That's what I'm hearing from Sarah.
we would have ours, whatever that is. And I know we do as a consortium. I know it's on the website.
I think we can state that, and the bidder may choose to propose additional definitions of equity. But I think we would want to consider both these traditional three categories as well as historically underserved groups.
Haley, can you scroll down?
Yeah, one second. I think I lost my, I was getting the consortium definition. I need to find my share screen. Okay.
Which I think you put in the chat, and thank you for that.
Yep.
And so a definition of equity would be adding our definition of equity from the writing consortium, and then also allowing the bidder to provide their own if they would like.
Haley, you beat me by just a millisecond on that. All right. I thought my web skills were good, but yours are better.
Millennial skills, you know.
All right. Number 4, how do the amounts of funding per school and per district required by the unit cost and weighted funding method differ? 5, what amounts would be required to phase in a weighted funding system? Okay, so this would probably be, and so are we going to expect them to provide their recommendation of where we should move? If so, then
No, I don't think so.
what? So you still have to work on me on that one a little bit, because I'm thinking, what are we getting for $1 million? Just somebody to tell us, pretty much what we could Google now, right? The different features of the different systems. And
no, this number 4 is specifically if we ran out a weighted funding system, a weighted student funding, and did the work to actually project how much would be funded for each school and each district, how much does that change from the unit cost method? And we can add any other alternatives that should be considered. For instance, modified the unit cost method modified by any advice of the consultants, by any improvements based on question 2.1 above. So I restricted it to these 2 because I thought it was important, but this would give you a chart over the next 5 years for each year. What will Warner be funded under the unit cost method, and what would they be funded under the weighted student funding method?
But
And
Gary,
that's how it would work.
but doesn't that assume, though, that we know the weights that we're working with?
I think we can do this for 2 or 3 weight scenarios, and the current unit cost system and the unit cost system with improvements. So that's giving us the information. There's question number 4 really gets down to brass tacks of a legislator looking at schools in their district and saying schools are going to be better off or they're not, and seeing which schools are likely to be better off. It's fundamental, but it has to be done by somebody who knows what they're doing. And so, Chuck, I'm sorry I jumped in, but this is much different work than something we could Google and know immediately.
Oh, don't be sorry. I might have misspoke. I meant number 5. I do love number 4 already. Number 5, it says to phase in a weighted student funding system. And where my mind was going is, does that kind of say that we are leaning toward that way if we put this in our scope of work or RFP? Or would it be That's why I was asking about the recommendations. I was thinking what amounts of education funding would be required to phase in the recommended funding system or the whatever, or added features. But, we can discuss that rather than just saying a weighted student funding system, because to me, that assumes that we think that that's the course of action.
I think we could say to phase in an alternative funding system, and it must include a weighted funding system because that's the dominant. It's the dominant approach used across the country and systems that have been modernized over the last 5 to 10 years. But there are others, but I wouldn't want to see that left out because and what I'm really saying here is most of these have to do a phase in or a hold harmless. And so you use the unit cost for a certain percentage of the total funds, and you use the whatever the alternative is, a weighted funding system for a certain percent. I was just trying to be concrete about showing how this could be phased in over time, rather than assuming that 2022, you use the unit system, in 2023, you move immediately to the alternative system.
I like this because it'll be up to the legislature to decide, given these different scenarios, what should take place. Kristen still has objections.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to be the person to keep pounding on this, but I just think being so explicit in that way is unfair to other possibilities for what could be used going forward. It absolutely explicitly puts in the decision maker's mind only one way to go about improving our funding system for equity. While it is the most predominant one, I don't necessarily know if, given our unique challenges and opportunities here in Delaware, that we whole hog go after that and we will, get the desired results. It may be a combination of things that include weighted student funding, but, and I think the principle of what I'm trying to say here is that you're being very explicit in what it is you are using this tool that the funding lawsuit put in place for one outcome. And it's not that I object to that one outcome. It's just, I feel that's, unless I'm mistaken, if that was the intent of the lawsuit, I still have objections to it. I still feel uneasy.
Larissa?
Kristen, I hear you, and I know you and I have talked about this, but if we don't make it this explicit, then we won't have the information we need regardless. That's my only worry. So couldn't we also be explicit around other, like sort of put in some language around specificity around other options as they arise or as are investigated over time?
I mean, I would be comfortable if in the recommendations, we add some additional language. I think, Gary had mentioned something early on. I responded in the chat. I thought that was appropriate, something along those lines, but I just wanted to put that in there. I could always be outvoted, but I just wanted to put that in the room. So thank you for indulging me.
Kristen, I think you have a good point though, which is that we want to provide flexibility. And so I think we want to provide models, because I know, at least for me, I like to look at a specific model and compare it to other models. I also know that Delaware is a maverick, and I've never seen Delaware adopt any model outright. So I do think you're right, though, in that the independent funding group could look at what they want to see, but also the legislature will as well. So I wonder how you marry those two things, having concrete examples and the ability to think outside the box and look at combinations or something else, which again would not be controlled by us because it's independent funding assessment. So they can determine that.
Yeah, I think I hear exactly what you're saying, and I understand how this might appear to limit. I do believe, after hearing this, if you would indulge me, I can either go back or work with Haley to get it broadened. I think we should, at a minimum, get the analysis for a weighted funding system, but we should also be willing to entertain other alternatives. I just didn't have any that I could be concrete about in my head today, because this is more of what I'm familiar with.
Is there a way to put the language there, Gary, for number 5, that does provide flexibility? So here is an example and open to other examples, 3 to 5.
Yeah, maybe it's as simple as what amounts of education funding would be required to phase in alternative funding systems examined in this report, including a weighted funding system for Delaware schools over the next 5 years. And then the alternatives would all be compared to, and the phase-in will be compared to the projections for the unit cost.
How does that sound to the group?
I'm there. I mean, I just want to make sure that, so the legislator who's picking this up and reading it isn't being shoehorned into a certain way of thinking. Now, as a CFO, if you drop down a weighted student funding system on my head tomorrow, I'll make it work and I'll be fine. Because, but, some of these other ones, I have no idea, but, so, I don't really have a predetermined notion of keep the unit count system, which is a nice little warm blanket to many of us, or weighted funding, which kind of like the icing on the cake that we're doing with opportunity funding and stuff like that is a form of weighted funding. So I just don't want the legislator to say, okay, I'm reading this report, weighted funding is the answer, without some kind of deeper dive.
The state has 2 different methods of doing this right now, Chuck, as you just point out. The predominant one is the unit cost, and that's our cake, right? And then the icing is the weighted pupil system that we use for the opportunity funding. And so one of the reasons why I put these 2 is they're the 2 methods that are currently in use in the state. And there may be alternatives. I would be totally open and really want to see what those alternatives would look like.
Yeah, this is great. I see number 6 peeking up over the horizon, and I love that one already. It's, what's the state's responsibility versus the local. Of course, we're asking them to do we want them to give the recommendation, which I'm fine with, or do we want to say, do we want to ask, compared to other states? Yeah, that's the bottom part. Yep. So up funding, not finding on the last sentence there, but number 6 looks good. Any comments?
I'm good with it.
To what extent is should and can number 6 be more specific? I feel like, Gary, this question is dancing around referendums a little bit, unless I'm mistaken. Like, is there a need to be specific? Because to Kristen's point, we're Delaware, we do things a certain way. I mean, do we ask specifically about local revenue generation, right? And be specific about referendums? And I'm not sure how the question changes necessarily, but I think that there's a certain amount of, I think we can, I'm framing my next comment.
Sarah, do you have maybe some language that we can use to modify what's here in order to get closer to your thoughts?
I'm trying, Chuck, I'm trying.
That's okay. That's okay. We're here.
What's, are you talking, Sarah, are you talking about 6 or 7? Because 7's where I raised. the
Oh, I
local
see
referendum.
referenda. I hadn't read to 7, Gary. I'm sorry.
Because I thought that might be helpful to you.
That is helpful to me.
Let's take a moment to read 7, 8, and 9 as well.
Can I pause on 6? Because when we use the word should, it's almost like a value statement that other people need to answer for us. It's like, and everyone will have a different value. So could it be something like, instead of, not how much responsibility should, but who bears,
Does.
right, like who bears the equation for the equitable funding? I would almost start it with the what factors, because that's really what we're trying to determine.
Well, aren't you asking for a recommendation, though, Larissa?
What?
I read should as a recommendation. So the term should here is asking what recommendations do you have?
It just makes me feel uncomfortable because it feels so personal. It's like, what do you think should happen? What are these people versus this is like a study. And that's why I like the second part of the question. What factors should be included? That should seems to work versus, because it's that question at the top is what everyone is like hanging it. That is such a important question. What is
I would only push that the language in the settlement is about making recommendations. And so at some point I'm not stuck on the word should. So I'll be very clear. I'm fine with changing that word.
I'm gonna make a suggestion. If you don't like it, that's totally fine too. I'm on the Chuck Mobile here.
No, I was just saying, I think part of it is about, we do want somebody to make recommendations because
Yeah.
one thing I find is our legislature, much like many people, like to have what are options and what are your best recommendations. When left with too many openings, people just get lost sometimes. So I think the verbiage, what I heard you saying, Larissa, and is that the verbiage you have issues with. My only push was that then the term recommendation should be put in.
Yes, I'm just thinking for a minute.
Okay.
So, okay, I'll be quiet and let you think.
No, you talk. I can think while you talk.
I was going to suggest that we might want to say, in looking across the US at the high, medium, and low proportional responsibility that states bear for education funding, how would Delaware's funding change under each of those? How would local districts' funding change under each of those? And then what factors should be included is a part of that. But that's an empirical analysis, and maybe that gets us, because we're a relatively high state in terms of the percentage of total education funding that we pay for. And I don't know what the implications would be for localities if we shifted some of that to the locals. I imagine with the new real estate tax appraisals, the property assessments, that we would get some big winners and some losers locally.
That bullet point, the draft bullet point we had too about the broken equalization formula kind of nestles in with this one too. I mean, it's anybody who's from the outside looking at our system needs to do a lot of work on our equalization formula to understand it, and hopefully in my view of this, make a recommendation or 2 or 3 or 4 on how to make it better based on their knowledge of other systems and study of our system. So that, maybe even just grab that bullet from our other thing and pop it in here at the end of number 6, or make it a 6A or something.
Sorry, which part, Chuck? The equalization?
Yeah, and we'll see if it looks like it fits, if you can grab that.
Sure, I can do it. I can make it pretty later if that's all right. I just
Yeah.
added in 6A right here for a reminder.
Okay.
And you also check, Larissa put her verbiage in the chat too. And just go back to the timeline. Chuck and I are gonna go back and refine all this, so we will have some present to the group and share it with you. Not tonight, but it'll be based off of what we're doing today. Time check is also 5:58. So I wanted to get the 7, 8, and 9 as well. And just so I'm clear, 9 is the last question, is that correct? Haley?
I've got some language about how we should.
There we go.
I think we should define independence, but yes.
Okay,
There's
thank
no
you.
more questions there.
Got it. You back with the 7, 8, and 9? Thanks, Haley. So this was Sarah's point that we were looking at. Any other commentary with that in mind, Sarah, or anybody else for 7?
No, 7, that's what I was driving at.
Okay.
Yeah, they look good.
Yeah.
Eight's a little scary because I'm trying to think of who else would set the budget.
Well, they're constrained in this is, maybe I should set the revenue expectations based on the property assessment, just to be clearer about that. But you make a good point, Chuck, because what I really meant is set the budgeted expenditure levels, which has to equal revenues. So that would give them authority for indirectly setting a tax rate.
So would that be, what are strengths and weaknesses of requiring or allowing local school boards to set tax rates for the school district? That's on number 8. You're typing in number 7.
I think maybe I'd like to just be a little bit more specific, because a school board, correct me if I'm wrong, can only set the tax rate if the referendum passes, correct?
Well, but this is fantasy land. There might not be referenda anymore. There might be, they might recommend that the boards can set rates up to a cap, or they might recommend that the state has to approve the rates, or they could recommend that, in some Jersey districts, I talked to friends up there, their township boards are their school board has to present to the township board a budget, and then they vote. It's just all kinds of crazy ways. So, but
would that come into 7 then? Because that would be a recommendation for the legislature to approve then for 7. To get to that world of 8, that's what I'm only adding in.
Yeah, I may have not put these together in the best way, but number 7 is to directly make sure that we directly get information on local referenda. And then if local referenda aren't, or the weaknesses are so profound, then the option that's usually employed is for local school boards to set the revenue, the amount to be raised from local property tax, and then indirectly set the tax rate is what they're doing. So, and there's strengths and weaknesses to that process, and I just thought they needed to be articulated in the study.
Does that answer your question, Kristen? To build that, because you're right.
It does. If you believe by stating the recommendation in that way, that question in that way, that you'll get to the end that I think we're all looking for is whether or not we should have referendum reform, then I'm fine with it.
Is there a way to do like one other crossover question at the end of 6? At the end of 6, it sort of leads me into 7, 8, 9, right? How does the proportional share of education funding that is borne by the state compare to other states? Okay, so that gives me a comparison model, right? And then I'm going into the local questions. I want to know, or do we want to know one additional step further based on how we compare? If we have one of the highest contributions from the state, then what are the other states doing for their local contribution, and vice versa? Like, is there a way to cross over so that we get the information, the complete information, I guess?
Yeah,
I don't know if that's too in the minutia also.
Yeah, I think it makes more explicit, perhaps instead of what are other states doing, but how would the rates that other states set for the state and local shares, how would the rates differ from the current rate used in Delaware? So we would have some comparative information.
But again,
is that what you're getting at, Sarah?
Yeah, I think what I'm wondering is, so we get back this information, and maybe to Larissa's point, though she's probably about to tell me that she disagrees with me, but we'll see. I feel like if we get back information about what the responsibility the state bears, and we get back the responses to local referenda, et cetera, if there's no crossover information, if there's no information about, okay, well, the state bears this responsibility and the other responsibility is met by these potential activities, and that sort of model is being enacted in 12 states. Okay, great. Now we have that information. I mean, maybe we would dream it up on our own, but to Aaron's point earlier, if we say to the legislature, well, here's a suggested model, right? That they come back and they give us a suggested model, that might be better than not.
All right. Does that change anything on these questions here? Or just provide further understanding? What
is it? What's the addition to 6, Sarah? Or are you fine with what's been added there?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Okay.
All right.
I think also if we have the time for it, either me or Brendan will re-watch this and capture the questions better than I am tonight, I think that might make a little more sense, and then we can refine the document and then maybe reshare it with Gary, if that works.
Thank you for rewatching this meeting. That is very noble.
Don't thank me yet. I might make Brendan do it.
Would you scroll through these again quickly, 1 through 9? I have another thought here. And so,
and Larissa put something else in the chat while you're scrolling.
Okay.
Just because I can imagine it being like this sort of war of a discussion about, well, we did this then, but now we're going to do this then. And it's like this whole should, but I'm clearly a person hung up on that word. So if everyone's cool with the word should, go for it.
Can you scroll down just a little more? Let's see. So we have, okay, so we have the unit cost and the weighted funding. Go down a little bit more. All right. I almost think that we need something between 5 and 6 talking about capital funding as well. I mean, we're just talking about operating here. Nobody's really talking tuition or match because that's just kind of a different flavor of operating that happens a different way. But I think we almost need, like, how we did with 2 and 3 about the unit funding, current unit funding and the weighted student funding, maybe repeat that, but ask about capital funding. Because that's huge, especially when you're talking equity. If you go back up to like number 2 or 3, let's look at that format there. Let's see. Say, what are the advantages and disadvantages of Delaware's current capital or method of funding capital projects? And then I don't know if there's a for example we can use, but maybe to ask if there are ways we could enhance or replace or whatever that. Are there other funding models that should be considered? I'm looking at 3.1, improvements to the current system on that. I know the answer is yes, but it'd be great to see what is out there to help us improve that, because that's kind of the forgotten piece of the funding sometimes.
I think you make a really good point, Chuck. I guess I would separate it out into its own section a little bit later, because the operating funding, it's interjecting it here kind of would make me wonder what's going on, because we've been referring mainly to operating funding above that. But
so let's make it number 10, pop it at the bottom.
I think that's great.
And then can we go back to the, oh, I see that we're talking about independent funding assessment. Can we go back to the bullets real quick, see if any of those can go away or if any of those need to be pulled into this?
Slide 11.
Kelly, you want me to stop share and you share the PowerPoint? I can also share the PowerPoint.
Okay, so it sounds like number 1 bullet we don't need. Is that correct? Or does anybody still insist on that?
I don't know if we need it given our 10 questions we've added.
I agree. So if there's no objection, we can strike that. Number 2 is we're going to move that somehow into, I think it was question number 6. I don't know, it was something about yeah, move it. We're going to move it into one of those questions. So number 3 is pretty much taken up by Gary's whole sheet. Number 4, we didn't touch yet. The successful bidder should use detailed data, blah, 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 from the past 5 to 8 years. And I think the intent here was to not make this a 40-year historical view, and not to be too current, but what do we think about this? This is something I think we tried to distill out of previous conversation. Any opinion here?
So I put 5 years specifically. I don't see any advantage to going more than 5 years personally, but that's embedded in the questions already.
Okay.
The level of detail to do this work for the weighted funding projections, you have to have student level data. For the unit cost, you have to have educator data. And all the allocations I've asked for are in the questions are at the school and the district level, both of which I think are really important. So I'm not sure about the principal. I think they're included in the unit cost, so they would be included there. So without saying they should use each of these types of data, I tried to indicate where these data would have to be used, but I didn't make it explicit.
So that's already embedded then. And then the last one, there was I think it's kind of saying the same thing where we don't, okay, we're talking about outcomes and proficiency. So we definitely want to link this to outcomes. And so is there anything we can do in our slate of 10 questions now to strengthen that connection to outcomes and student proficiency, if we all think we should? What do we think?
I definitely think we need to focus on outcomes. Money for money's sake is never going to impact children positively.
Right.
And so I think we do need to make sure we're looking at that.
What good is equity without outcomes, right?
Yep.
So
I wonder if we might consider taking the question that's the first one before question one. What is the amount of education, what amount of education funding is necessary to achieve equitable outcomes, including measures of student achievement, learning, well-being? I don't know how, but we could broaden it right there.
I'm fine with that. That's
Yeah.
what we're trying to get to.
yeah. So do we want to go back to the questions? Let's go back to the questions. And I know that there was another part at the bottom about independent, defining independent. So
I did capture what you just said, Gary, just right here in question 1.
based on what we said, I know we got more discussion to go, but our questions 1 through 10, we'll refine them and we'll put them back up. But it sounds like we have some measure of consensus on these. Is that correct? Anyone disagree?
See, only thumbs up, Chuck.
All right, cool.
And that's because Larissa has her camera on. So there's Shannon.
All right, all right. So thanks for bringing that to us, Dr. Henry. This was great.
And then there's something in the chat from Monique.
Simply put some information in the chat that would be helpful. It's relevant to the most recent research around definitions for educational equity specifically. And then to chime on to what Chuck just brought up regarding out.
Monique, we lost you.
I'm back.
Okay.
It's extremely important for us to include outcomes because that is the impact. It's the reason that the process and processes around equity are essential is to achieve those outcomes. And I'll put some information regarding inputs and outcomes so that they can correlate to each other. Thank you.
Which I like the definition, the focus on outcomes there. I'm curious if we need to add in to Monique's point, psychologically and physically safe and secure. Thinking about a move to MTSS across the state. Can you go back to 1 right above that? Outcomes. Oh, wait.
Did you mean up here?
Yeah, sorry, for 1. So student achievement, learning, well-being. Yep. I think we should definitely have SEL. Yep, right there. Psychological. What is well-being physically safe? Haley?
Well, Gary said well-being. I think we can make it, emotional, physical. We can reflect it in all the ways that we mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the words that Monica put in. I think psychologically and physically safe and secure is good. I think it will overlap with well-being, but it makes the point stronger.
And that's Monique, Dr. Henry.
What did I say?
Monica.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
It's past my bedtime. I'm sorry, Monique.
This is maybe your last meeting as well for a lot of you before Thanksgiving, some turkey. I have 4 more to go. Cool. So I feel like this is a good point to put a pin in this because our next step is to refine this, as Haley mentioned, and then get it out to the members without hearing disagreement. Is everyone fine? Do we need to take a vote on the actions? I see Kelly shaking her head that we agree with this flow.
We should, but let's go and take another quick stare at the independence statement. So is that something that we also include in this? I don't see a problem with this and on reading it. Any comments on this? All right, and there was one more slide. If you go back to the slides, there is the, I don't know if we want to suggest a anything for the evaluation matrix or not, but let's take a quick look at that. If we say that we don't want to or need to, that's fine, but if we do, we can.
I had looked at this slide, Chuck, and I apologize. We're bringing this up in real time with everybody. I think given the scope of work we were presented by DOE and by this conversation, I don't know if this breakdown accurately reflects what we've been discussing.
I think I agree with that. So this would need more hammering, I think, if we were to include it.
And I would recommend that we submit what we discussed tonight, if all members agree to that.
Okay, so the 10 questions plus the independent statement, but not this, right?
Yeah, that is what I'm proposing.
All right, is there a motion on that?
With, so the motion, just to be clear, would be that members would give Chuck and Aaron, the co-chairs, ability to refine the questions and independent statement. And then we would definitely share it with members, but we would submit that to the Reading Consortium. Before Kristen goes, because she has sick kids, can I get a motion on that one?
This is Tika, so moved.
Second, this is Shannon.
Lots of seconds. Kelly and Kelly, you can pick which one. All in favor?
Aye.
Perfect. All right, good stuff, good stuff. This is I love working with this group. Dissent, lots of great conversation, and then we move forward solution oriented. Since we're going through the slides in 620, I want to just bring up two ideas. So if you hit the next one. Next steps, we are looking at, just to close out, not for tonight, but actually looking at a report card for the settlement. One of the charges for this committee is to give input, but also to give feedback. And so if you hit the next slide, this is a draft of a rubric that we'll share with you with the entire group, not for this meeting. So the idea behind this was we wanted to rate what has been taking place with the settlement, provide a report card of sorts. It's similar to 1 through 4 on the SBAC, FYI. We'll share this with you. Again, this is not for tonight, so it's 6:20. I'm very clear about that. But the goal would be, this is something we want to do moving forward. If you hit that next one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and this is a sample of just what we'll be sharing out with you on the actions taken. One part that we've been wrestling with is how do you measure impact? We don't have a rubric for that. So we'd definitely like to discuss at our next meeting. Also, the slide before did show that we have John Niebauer presenting, because one of the last pieces of the settlement, not last, one of the pieces of the settlement is the teacher portion of how we increase recruitment and retention. So John Niebauer is starting on that now. Wants to add that to our agenda. So it'll be the first 10 minutes for the next meeting as we close out the year. That is a lot. Any public comment? Wow. Okay. Any questions from members before I did go backwards and say public comment, but I didn't actually address any questions from members. Thanksgiving crickets. Okay. Perfect. With that, the next meeting is January 24th. Have a wonderful, happy, joyous Thanksgiving. Looking forward to seeing everybody at our next meeting. Thank you for everyone participating and also giving input and feedback. I definitely appreciate it. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Go
Thanks.
Eagles. Go
Bye.
Eagles.
Thank you, you too. Good night, guys.